The points I'm raising in this video are drawn from my recording The Glory of the Moment from the album Days of Sun and Days of Rain. In this piece I'm exploring the idea of having fairly tightly structured sections interspersed with sections where there is, musically speaking, more freedom. So I combine contrasting sections of structured music with more ambient interludes, but at the same time I need to be looking for ways to ensure musical continuity. Firstly, let's compare features of a couple of these two section types to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Here from bar 45 we have a standard drum kit part working with a keyboard synth whose chord changes are supported by a bass line, over which a guitar solo sings. Contrast this with the next section. Abstract unusual percussion, no chord progressions, an added haunting sounding synth part, giving the bass player ample opportunity to play more freely. But notice I'm keeping original synth parts from the previous section to help give a sense of continuity. I've just talked about the unusual percussion part in this free section. Let's look at this more closely. I'm still using the same Ableton drum kit called Coral, but I've modified it by replacing one of the drum samples with the atmospheric Ableton sample Dark Bell. I also move away from a standard bass, snare, hi-hat pattern to something more unusual. I'll solo it and we'll have a listen. The drums in both sections are fairly short repeated loops, which benefit considerably from the use of an Ableton effect called Add Some Random. I've referred to this in previous tutorials in this series, and I think it is particularly effective in this piece. Adding an element of randomness to the velocities of drum parts adds interest and variety, and goes some way towards making the parts sound more human. The intriguingly named Jarble synth from Ableton's synthesizer collection is assigned to a part that's worth a mention. Chords on rich synth sounds can sound very muddy, so here I keep things simple by using just two notes from a chord pattern which are slightly staggered. This gives all the texture I require from this part. It looks sparse on the page, but it gives a richly textured accompaniment. And with the other parts, finally, let's look at the important contribution made by the Suburban synth to this piece. This has overlapping sounds which come courtesy of a high sustain setting, producing some interesting if unforeseen harmonic textures. If we look at the MIDI clip, we see very little overlapping of sounds, but by using a synth with a high release setting, these sounds will sustain considerably longer. Let's listen to some of this overlapping and savour the harmonies which they generate. And with the other sounds. So, from my commentaries on this piece, we can now begin to round up a few musical principles, which can be taken into your own Ableton projects, regardless of genre. Firstly, we contrasted a tightly structured section with a collection of sounds and approaches that provide more freedom for an instrumentalist, in this case the bass player, to stretch out in more musically adventurous ways. The second idea is that we can modify standard drum kits by replacing a non-essential percussion sound with any sampled sound that's going to add something to our piece. In this instance, we replaced a standard piece of kit with the haunting Ableton sample Dark Bell. The percussion loops in both sections are fairly short, but using the Add Some Random effect helps provide a sense of more variety. Using rich synth sounds to provide chordal accompaniment can make for much muddiness. Just using one or two notes is often all that is required to provide a satisfying textural part. Again, with synths, a high release setting will often produce sets of overlapping sounds which can generate interesting and unusual harmonic texture. With a little trial and error, you can come up with parts which are highly original and musically very satisfying. I hope you've enjoyed this video and find it useful. You can hear the full track by following the links given below the video, and of course, constructive comments are also most welcome.